West.
A new book says the U.S. military has for years been contaminating the water on the Japanese island of Okinawa, affecting drinking water for 450,000 people. High levels of carcinogenic chemicals have been found in rivers near the base, and local authorities say the U.S. military isn't cooperating by allowing government officials to inspect the bases.
She the definition of a bad bitch, stole her. I'm the definition of a bandit.
An environmental tragedy is lurking beneath the Pacific Ocean. It's been unfolding for generations.
Very disturbing. A toxic dump site that settled on the ocean floor decades ago continues to wreak havoc on marine life to this very day. KCAL9's Lori Perez dives deep into this crisis.
It's a feeling of, how does nobody know about this? How is it that we are the first people to ever see this with our eyes?
It's hard to believe, but for at least 30 years, Dr. David Valentine says the scientific community had heard rumblings about, but frankly did nothing about reports of this massive chemical dumping ground about 10 miles off the coast of LA. From 2011 to 2013, Valentine and his crew on their own went looking in the deep water between Long Beach and Catalina Island. These are some of the images captured by a camera attached to an autonomous vehicle they sent to the ocean floor 3,000 feet down.
It's just first a shock. It's a gut punch. Now we're talking about 100,000 or hundreds of thousands of barrels of industrial waste, much of it toxic. That we just dumped there because it was easy.
Since then, his team has been putting together the pieces of how it got there, suspecting it's a second dump site of Montrose Chemical Corp., once the country's largest manufacturer of DDT. A legal battle years ago found the Torrance company dumped millions of pounds of pesticide into county sewers from the 40s until the 70s, and a devastated 34-square-mile area off the Palos Verdes coast was designated a Superfund cleanup site. Last year, Valentine published his new findings, stunning residents and state leaders and offering clues that could help biologists understand high levels of DDT in California's sea lions and their startling rate of cancer, which biologists say is rare in wild animals.
About 25% of the adult and subadults do have cancer. And that is an extremely alarming number. Given the very severely high rate and how abnormal it is, it's really important that we understand what is driving this disease in these
people in the fishing industry find themselves debating warming seas, toxic algae, big oil, and a lawsuit. Crabs further north tested positive for elevated levels of domoic acid. It's a neurotoxin that causes something called amnesic shellfish poisoning, which can lead to stomach problems, but also dizziness, short-term memory loss, seizures, and sometimes death. So before each season starts, California officials test crabs for it. The way they see it, crab harvests are jeopardized by warmer water. Warmer water is tied to climate change. Climate change is tied to fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are tied, of course, to big oil.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel here. It's Lavender here, and today I'm doing a video called How U.S. Imperialism Pollution Affects the Ocean and Other Freshwater Resources, along with the people who use the ocean, and all the wildlife that uses the ocean, including the animals that live in the ocean, and mammals that use the ocean. So let's get started into this video. So these are in no order, but I'm just going to start reading things that happened as in U.S. imperialism and how it affects, water sources. So U.S. authorities have been repeatedly tried covering up contamination in water and everywhere that, United States does imperialism through lies, disinformation, and attacks on reporters and journalists. And trying to censor them. It's very common for Porky, aka Capitalist Pigs, to do that. Mainstream Capitalist Pig media, etc., like that. There is a book called Poisoning the Pacific. A new book details U.S. military contamination of islands and oceans. More than 12,000 pages of U.S. government documents show military operations contaminating the Pacific Ocean with radioactive waste, nerve agents, and chemical weapons like Agent Orange. Chronicles the U.S. military's decade-long contamination of indigenous lands across the Pacific, as well as the whole ocean itself, endangering lives and ecosystems across the vast Pacific Ocean. It was written by British journalist John Mickeld. Poisoning the Pacific is based on more than 12,000 pages of documents obtained under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act through interviews with local residents, military veterans, and researchers and scientists. The book argues that for decades the U.S. has treated its territories in the Pacific with negligence, allowing the military to violate indigenous rights, seize land, and damage delicate ocean environmental ecosystems. If you guys don't know, the United States military is the biggest polluter on this entire earth. They are so bad, and that's why I'm making this video, because it's a really big passion of mine, because we need to stop, capitalism and U.S. imperialism, because capitalism and war go hand in hand. Capitalism creates war, which creates the United States imperialism. Another incident, a clam dragging operation off the coast of New Jersey, pulled up an old military artillery shell. The long-submerged World War I era explosive was filled with a black tar-like substance. They found it was filled with mustard gas in its solid form, chemical weapons of mass destruction that the U.S. imperialist army dumped at sea decades ago, has finally ended up on the shorelines in the United States. Although it's been long known that some chemical weapons were dumped in the oceans, records obtained by the Daily Press showed that it had previously been classified. Weapon dumping program was far more extensive than had been previously known and suspected. The Army now admits it secretly dumped 64 million pounds of nerve and mustard gas agent in the sea, along with 400,000 chemical-filled bombs, landmines, and rockets, and more than 500 tons of radioactive waste tossed overboard. The chemical agents could pose a hazard for generations. The Army has examined a few of its 26 dump zones, but not in the last 30 years. The Army can't even exactly where all the weapons were dumped from World War II to 1970. Army records are sketchy. Sea dumping chemical weapons may be slowly leaking from decades of saltwater corrosion, resulting in time-delayed release of deadly toxic chemicals and radioactive chemicals, and an unforeseeable environmental impact on the oceans and the areas around it. Environmental impacts. The Army's secret ocean dumping program spanned at least 3 decades, from 1944 to 1970. They dumped weapons that were deemed to be unneeded surplus. They were hazardous to transport, so they decided, because it was too expensive to store and too hazardous to transport, too dangerous to bury, and difficult to destroy, they decided to dump it in the ocean. In the early 1970s, the United States of imperialism publicly admitted it dumped chemical weapons off the U.S. coast. Congress banned the practice in 1972. However, undersea bombs threaten marine life. Scientists are concerned about corroding unexploded bombs that litter the seafloor of the earth from U.S. imperialism and other forms of Western imperialism. High carcinogen levels found in wildlife in the ocean near bombs and waters where the bombs were dropped. Leaking toxins from these imperialist bombs are taking a toll on marine life. We know that these bombs are leaking cancer-causing materials and endangering sea life, said marine ecologist James Porter. James Porter stumbled upon another finding: cancer. He discovered that duster worms, sea urchins, and various types of coral found near bombs and bomb fragments contain high levels of carcinogen material. Many species of fish and other sea life, several of which end up on our plates, are displaying increasing levels of mercury and highly toxic substances. At the moment, according to recent research, approximately 82% of the exposure to this consumers in the United States come from eating seafood. Another environmental disaster caused by the United States of imperialism and Western imperialism overall is the chemical called DDT. What's invented was in 1939 and used as a World War II as a pesticide to help protect United States imperialism troops from insect-borne diseases like malaria. In the 1960s, DDT was discovered to be toxic. Forever chemical. Over time, eating food laced with DDT builds up inside the tissues of animals along with humans, resulting in harmful side effects. The EPA now calls it a probable human carcinogen, which means it's dangerous and cancerous and toxic and radioactive. Although the exact number of the dumping is still unknown, a historical account estimates that it may be as much as 500,000 barrels in the ocean of it in the California coast. Its ongoing impact, including a recently discovered alarming and unprecedented rate of cancer among the California state's sea lion population, with 1 in every 4 adult sea lions plagued with the disease. A 30-year study on sea lions finds an alarming statistic that 25% of adult sea lions have cancer. The largest DDT manufacturer in the United States, Monroe's Chemical Corporation, was located along the Southern California coast in the city of Torrance from 1947 through 1982. Monroe manufactured and distributed DDT worldwide. For decades after that, the hazardous waste was disposed of in two ways. Some of the toxic pollutant was dumped into storm drains and sewer systems, while the others were pumped out to sea during overflow pipes 2 miles offshore of the city of Rancho Palos Verdes. The company was later sued, and after a legal battle that ended in 2000, the companies involved, including Montrose, settled for $140 million. Most of the money has been used by a program to restore contaminated sites in the ocean system and to rehabilitate ecosystems impacted by the poison. DDT gets into the food chain when it is consumed from the contamination ocean bottoms by tiny marine organisms and creatures, which are then eaten by larger things such as fish, which are then consumed by larger fish and marine mammals like sea lions, and then it gets in the sea lion's blubber, this toxin does, causing cancer. Over time, it builds up again in the tissues and blubber of marine mammals in general, a process called bioaccumulation. To this day, signs all along the Southern California coast warn fishermen not to eat certain fish in the area because of this contaminant from the United States military. Another incident of United States imperialism can be found in Puerto Rico. Unexploded bombs litter waters of Puerto Rico a decade after the U.S. military ceased target practice in the area. At the current cleanup rate, the Navy says it will take until 2025 to remove all the environmental damage left by more than 60 years of target practice in the area of Puerto Rico. There are hundreds of unexploded bombs and artillery shells just like this all around the waters of Vices. Somebody told the press, and no one is doing anything about it. No one, however, is addressing the ocean damage. Fishing has always been the main industry in that city, in that area. Half the population of the people that live there still live in poverty. The island has the highest cancer rate of anywhere in Puerto Rico. Studies by Puerto Rican scientists have found that 34% of residents with toxic levels of mercury, 55% contaminated with lead, and 69% with arsenic. There also was an incident with the autumn pumpkin farm event that had taken place for decades. They had to stop selling pumpkins due to the United States Navy's issues and how they're polluting the environment. The produce is no longer available for public consumption. In 2016, irrigation water has been found to be contaminated with elevated levels of PFC, and the farms has joined forces with a local water district to sue the U.S. Air Force, alleging that toxic chemicals used in the firefighting foam at their base at a nearby base had tainted the water supply, perhaps for decades, prompting health worries. Environmental Working Group found that more than 1,500 drinking water systems nationwide could be contaminated by this, affecting as many as 110 million people. Studies suggest that certain, toxic chemicals may affect the growth, learning behavior of infants and older children, and women being pregnant and trying to get pregnant, etc. And this is a quote from one of the people in the article. "It's such a damn shame," a woman said of the farm's fate. "It also once was her home. For 11 years we drank the water and ate the food. Tests showed the level of one chemical compound in her blood system was 100 times higher than normal." And the last thing I want to talk about is the United States' imperialism. How in Hawaii, military bases dumped 630,000 pounds of toxic nitrate into the ocean. U.S. military bases in Hawaii dumped more than 500,000 pounds of nitrate, toxic chemical compounds commonly found in wastewater treatment plants, fertilizers, and explosives into the ocean in 2019. Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam led with the release of 540,000 pounds, according to the Environmental Protection Agency's latest toxic release inventory. The rest, more than 86,000 pounds, came from U.S. Marine Corps based in Hawaii and Condon Bay. The base has federal permits to dump the waste. The Marine Corps base also released more than 170,000 pounds of naphthalene, which Abrams said comes from jet fuel combustion and aircraft engines into the air in 2019. They had this quote of someone who worked there saying that Marine Corps Base Hawaii is dedicated to preserving the environment, which is a fucking lie, because United States of imperialism and imperialism in general and Western imperialism destroys the environment, you know, so they're full of shit. So if you guys like this video, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Bye guys.